After 1971, India has never had a war. We've been in a lot of counterinsurgency or what you call anti-terrorism kind of operations. And then there was a skirmish in Kargil of 1999. And apart from that, it is what happened now, Op Sindoor.
Please decode Operation Sindoor for us. What is the chain of events that happens once center decides to declare a war?
I personally feel it was a brilliant move. For years and years, we've had this issue of terrorism being sponsored by Pakistan into our country. We didn't strike Pakistan-occupied Kashmir or the disputed areas. We struck the heartland, the Punjab heartland. And that, I think, was the message we were sending to Pakistan, that should you mess with us, then now we will strike you where it hurts.
Let's get to know the same Op Sindoor, for example, from a soldier's point of view. So people who are on the front line, उनकी लाइफ में क्या बदलाव आए होंगे जब से ये शुरू हुआ?
See, उनकी लाइफ में तो बिल्कुल बदलाव आएगा. Firstly, your family is impacted because they know this guy is now going to go into a battle.
What does a day look like in the life of a general?
The more senior you are in the army, the more responsibility you have on your shoulders. So there are two kind of generals. One is...
What did you find surprising or what did you find different or unexpected about the life in NDA?
Everything.
Everything.
Because...
What do you think of Bollywood's representation of these academies? Is that close to what it is really, or...?
They do a pretty okay job, but there is much more than what they show you.
Please talk us through the Ironman journey. What was it like when you showed up at the start line?
Let me talk to you about it in the preparation.
Leading up to the start line?
Yeah.
Yes.
And then I'll talk about the start line.
Sure.
The start line was easy. The preparation was not easy. I wanted to quit every day. You know, the training is so damn grueling. But I used a technique called...
How does one build that mindset of doing hard things, and why does it matter?
I think...
Welcome to the Find Your Ultra podcast. This is a super special episode with someone from the Indian Army. This conversation is actually with Major General Vikram Dogra. He's of course a retired army officer. He was commissioned in 1981. He was awarded the Sword of Honor at the IMA. Since then, he went on to win many awards and he's a highly decorated officer. And at the age of 58, he became the first Indian serving army officer to complete an Ironman triathlon. So he became an Ironman at the age of 58. And he was the first Indian serving officer to do that. This barely scratches the surface as far as his achievements are concerned. They're numerous, and I'm not even going to attempt to dive into them. This conversation is really amazing because we've spoken about the latest Operation Sindoor, his thoughts about that, his thoughts about the way we've been battling terrorism for a while, his journey in the army, his personal and professional journey. We've tried to touch up a little bit upon fatherhood. And of course, we've spoken about his journey as an endurance athlete. Of course, how could we not? This is Find Your Ultra podcast. So without further ado, let's dive right in. This is Major General Vikram Dogra and me in the Find Your Ultra podcast. Indulge away. General Vikram Dogra, welcome to the Find Your Ultra podcast.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for making time to do this. The podcast is called Find Your Ultra because I'm interested in running and I'm an ultra distance runner and my community is of runners and triathletes and endurance people. You've lived a life in the forces, which makes for a very rich life, like life rich of experiences, and the endurance aspect, just another whole new dimension to it. And you were the first major to do this?
First general.
First
serving army officer and only general in the world.
Wow. Yeah. So that is phenomenal. And there are just so many things I want to learn because, I've not had much of an exposure to the life in the army. And I would love to know that side of your life that you've lived so far. And then we'll talk about endurance as well. So welcome to the show. We always begin with getting to know the person a little bit. Your background, where were you born, raised? What was your childhood like? Just talk to us about that.
My dad was in the army. And so I was born in a place called Udhampur in J&K. That's where he was posted that time.
Mm-hmm.
And thereafter, being an army kid, we went all over the country from place to place. Till finally, when I was in a school where the hostel shut, then I had to move to a hostel in Mussoorie.
Okay.
So my childhood was, like I said, all over. And my dad was in the army. And that is what actually groomed me and got me into what I am, because I had a very, very sound army foundation.
Tell me a little bit, tell us, those who are not exposed to that army foundation, what does it look like? Is it a very disciplined life? What was your childhood like?
Well, I will not say it's a very disciplined life because I was born in an army family, but I think it was because of my father, who was a very disciplined person. Not only was he disciplined, but he was also very strict. That's how I think fathers were in those days. So that, along with my army background, to say that, the kind of places we are posted in, the environment in which I grew up, cantonments, seeing him go and interact with people in uniform, the kind of physical activities that people in uniform do, the kind of discipline they have, the kind of ethos and spirit code that they have. All that together is the foundation that I speak of, which actually turned me into what I am today.
Lovely. And did you have like an athletic sort of background during the school days? Were you active in playing sports and stuff?
I only played sports. So my dad was a very good sportsman. He was the Northern India boxing champion pre-independence when he was in college. So he was studying in a place in Lahore, in Government College Lahore. So he was that vintage. And also he was a very good shot. Amongst the army, he got the Commonwealth pistol shooting championship in the army championships that took place. So that was the background in which I was brought up. And he got me a rifle, an air gun when I was 7 years of age and put me to shoot. So I became a very good shot. And like I said, I only played sports. I was good at academics, but I was never fond of academics. So I had a good sporting background.
Right. And do you remember any incidents or anecdotes from your early life that sort of helped shape you into the person that you are today?
Well, many of them. In fact, I don't know where to start, but I will narrate about things which I did when I was in, say, class 7 or 8. So my dad was posted in a place called Kanpur. And this was in the mid-70s. And that was a time when he would be away at work and I would be, we were staying in a big bungalow. There aren't any friends around because the bungalows are so big and everybody doesn't have a child your age. So I used to have another boy who used to live close by. Both of us used to go around and, these Tonga horses were left loose to graze. So we would go and catch them. We would put our noose around them, open their feet because the owners used to let them loose, but tie their front feet so that they couldn't go too far. So we would put a noose on the neck, open their feet, put a cushion on the back, and that's how I learned to ride in class 7. And that helped me a lot later because I became a very good rider in the academy. My dad also used to take me for hunts, duck hunts on the Ganges in Kanpur. And that actually got me into shooting, into shikar. Of course, today shikar is no more appreciated or otherwise, but those were different times when you could actually go and, shoot these. So I had an exposure to shikar, I had an exposure to riding, I had an exposure to being in the wild because we used to go for camping trips, treks. My dad used to take me for treks, show me partridges, show me different kind of birds which were there, rabbits. So those incidents, I feel, left a very telling mark on the kind of
Which is why I say that it's a rich life. Like, it's so diverse in experiences. Like, compare that to today's city-dwelling kids. iPads and phones is what they're exposed to. As just compare that to this sort of a lifestyle. It's incredible. What age did you decide that you were going to become an army officer, army person?
Surprisingly, at the age of 4.
Okay.
So, like,
was it because in Indian households it is like doctor का बेटा शायद doctor बनेगा या actor का बेटा actor बनेगा, ये पहले होता था कि पापा ऐसे हैं तो ये बनना है. Was that the reason or?
That was, I don't know if that was the reason because nobody told me that you should join the army.
Okay.
But it was me wanting to join the army, which was then echoed by my parents.
Right.
So I wanted to be like my father.
Right.
Like I said, I was very impressed by his lifestyle and the environment. So that's when I decided, maybe when I was in class 4, and then anybody who would ask me, what do you want to be? I would say, I want to join the army. And later, that was echoed by my parents. What's he going to be? Oh, he's going to join the army. So it was the other way around.
Right. Okay. Wonderful. And then when you got selected, you went to the NDA. What was life there like? So it's great to have an exposure and an idea of what it's going to be like because you were surrounded by people in the forces. But what did you find surprising or what did you find different or unexpected about the life in NDA?
Everything.
Everything.
Because when you talk of being surrounded by the army, I was surrounded by the army as an army kid. And then I had the perks and privileges of what probably my father's rank was at that time and the environment. But when I went to NDA, it was grassroots. I went from a boarding school. I thought I was pretty good in sports and outdoors. But when I joined the NDA, and you have the pulls and pressures of not only academics because you are doing a graduation course, you're now put into a lot of physical training, grueling physical training, marching, military training, weapon training, and whole lot of stuff. And then you have the seniors who are breathing down your neck, the sudden discipline. I was like a duck out of water. And for the first year, I was put into a weak squad, physically weak squad, because I couldn't clear my tests. Like you said, though I was brought up in an environment, it was not the same
It
environment.
was a shock.
It was totally different. And the interaction that you have with the other cadets who come from different parts of India, different backgrounds, different mindsets, that takes a lot of adjustment to be done. So that is one of the bigger challenges, I would also say.
So life wasn't easy.
Not
even
at
though
all.
you were
Not at all. The first 1 year, 1.5 years is pretty tough. And then you get into the groove and then, you are part of the system then. Then it becomes comfortable and like you're in your comfort zone.
Right. And what do you think of Bollywood's representation of these academies? Is that close to what it is really, or?
Well, I would feel they do a pretty okay job because they show you some glamour of it. They show you a little bit of ragada also. They show you the discipline part. But there is much more than what they show you. I think in every aspect, less the glamour.
Right. Retrospect, when you're telling, you can gloss over the ugly parts a little bit and glamorize certain parts a little more.
Yeah.
Which is your, speaking of Bollywood, which is your favorite Bollywood movie around army or on army?
There is one which was made by this guy, Nana Patekar, Prahar.
Prahar.
Yeah.
I haven't seen.
Very realistic. You should see it. He spent a lot of time training to play the role. And it's to do with the commando training and then how it's based around an army officer. And of course, they show his training in other aspects and also then how he finds himself to be a little bit of misfit in the CV street later. It's a nice movie.
Right.
I loved it.
Yeah.
And of course, then more recently, this, on the line of control, I forget the name, this guy, Roshan, Hrithik Roshan.
Hrithik Roshan's.
Yeah, he played LOC or one of these movies, yeah.
Yeah, I've also not been in touch with Bollywood much, yeah. But okay, wonderful. Great. And so you mentioned Nana Patekar's life in the second half, like becoming a civilian later.
Yeah, he had a little bit of a issue in terms of,
Yeah, isn't that like a real thing that officers or people in the forces go through? Like overseas, it is very well recognized, the PTSD, especially people who've been in the war zone for long enough. And there's it's acknowledged and recognized, and there are support systems around it. At least they're trying to build that. And there are so many movies around that also in Hollywood. What is the support system in India like for mental health of people who've just retired from forces and are struggling to, let's say, adjust to this new life because they've lived like a strict, disciplined, hard life, and then they go into this life and they sort of let go, a lot of them let go of what they've learned there. Like there are people, examples like you, who continue to pursue their journey and they're finding their ultra in different ways, finding their best. You're still pursuing your best in different sports. But a lot of people just give into different habits and they, don't know how to cope with this.
Well, I don't think really there is anything formalized about any mental health assistance being provided. And also, it's very individual. I never faced any issues post my retirement, which has been now 6 years. I probably felt that I am having a better time now. I have more time to do what I pursue and truly like rather than doing straight-jacketed things which I'm expected to do. So to that extent, you do get a freedom of a kind which you didn't have earlier. As far as people, some of them may feel a little bit of a vacuum because, you've been surrounded by people, a certain kind of environment, a certain kind of way of life. Now, it's for you, whether you want to carry that on or you don't want to. The opportunities are all in your hands.
Yeah.
And if you don't prepare for something that you knew the day you joined the army, that you're going to retire, if you didn't prepare for it, then I think you have lacked somewhere in your preparations.
Yeah, and I think because there's a lot of life left in you.
Yes.
It's life.
A lot of life. I think only life just started.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
not got over.
Yeah. You've got to then think about how are you going to transition and also what is the plan for the next phase of life.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Brilliant, sir. Talking of being in the army, you had to be away from the family for long periods. Did you ever feel, did you ever miss being with the family? Did you ever want to wish that, you could also, like person in a regular job, go home, spend more time with the kids?
So, whilst I was in the army, one never thought about it because it was a way of life and it was something that was happening all around us. And I had seen it happen when I was a child because my dad was in the army. And then I faced the same and my environment was such. But now in hindsight, When I look back, I feel yes, probably if I had more time, I could have done A, B, C, or D with my children, or, moved them in a certain manner, or done some activity with them, and those kind of things. Those feelings always come. But whilst we were there, it was a normal.
Yeah.
It was a normal.
Yeah. And speaking of that, you were just showing me videos of your son. He's wonderfully fit and also into, fitness and CrossFit like activities. I was just seeing him doing jumping, burpees and stuff like that. What kind of a father you've been? Have you been like a strict, disciplined father, like the army thing carries over here?
So I modeled myself to be a father from what I knew of a father, that my father was strict. But like I said, that was what fathers were in those days. And then as time passed, as my being a father, I try to evolve and change with the times, be more liberal, more understanding, more open. I think this question ideally would be answered by my children, who would probably feel I've been very strict because no person feels his father's been liberal.
Yeah.
But I would, if I was to give myself some kind of a rating on this, I would say I think I've tried to draw a balance. Whether I succeeded or not, I really don't.
Mm. And what do you think has influenced their fitness journeys, like your children's fitness journeys?
I think it's the environment.
Mm-hmm.
So
because they see you doing one thing or the other all
not
the
only
time.
me, my wife also. She's a marathon runner, so she's run all the half marathons around Delhi, Mumbai.
What's
Shimla.
her name? I might know.
Supriya Dogra.
Yeah, most likely.
So they've seen her into it, and she also evolved into fitness only after we got married. And then she took it up to a different level. In fact, she was all ready to do the half Ironman, except that she got dengue 14 days before the event.
Wow, okay.
So maybe our being physically inclined, the environment around them also, they grew up in cantonments and seeing the army way of life. I think all that put a...
That, and also I think you picking up different sports and even triathlons, I think it's very infectious. It does infect people around you. It's a good infection to have.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted to know more about war times. So what have been the conflict situations that you were involved in or you were in command? Do you want to tell us a little bit?
So as you are aware, after 1971, India has never had a war. We've been in a lot of counterinsurgency or what you call terrorism, anti-terrorism kind of operations in the Jammu and Kashmir or in the Northeast. And then there was a skirmish in Kargil, which we call the Kargil War of 1999. And apart from that, it is what happened now, Op Sindoor. So there have been no other major issues except, like I said, to do with terrorism.
Right.
And I was involved in all of these in the sense whether it was to do with counterterrorism or it was to do with Kargil. And we also had something called Op Parakram, if you must have heard, where, both the Indian army and the Pakistani army mobilized. And they sat at the borders for almost 9 to 10 months. India was threatening that we're going to attack. But somehow it never got into action.
Which year was this?
This was around 2001.
Okay.
Yeah, 2001.
Post-Kargil.
Yeah, post-Kargil. So it was post-Kargil. So these were the situations, and I was actively involved in all of these.
Okay. Would you mind walking us through the life of a general? What does a day look like in the life of a general?
Well, the life of a general, I would say, is very, very busy. Because the more senior you are in the army, the more responsibility you have on your shoulders. And as a general, if you are in the field, so there are two kinds of generals. One is when you take over a formation, like a division or a corps, that's a field commander. Or then after that, you go on a desk job where you are making policy. So the lives are totally different.
Right.
When you're in the field, like when I was commanding 22 Infantry Division in Meerut, and a division has something like about 16,000 troops, which are in different, below division you have brigades commanded by brigadiers, and then they have units commanded by colonels, and then you have companies commanded by majors, and so on and so forth. So there's a hierarchy out there. And you are finally responsible for the fighting efficiency and the administrative efficiency of this entire outfit. So whatever happens in that is your responsibility. And therefore, I say that it's a busy time because you have to monitor everything. Whilst there are people at every level looking after the specific subjects, but the buck stops at you.
Right.
Should there be anything good happening, it's credit to you. And if something bad happens, it's credit to you.
Right.
So a typical day would be, to wake up in the morning and then you, of course, do your own physical
What time
activity.
does General wake?
I think it's purely very personal. A guy like me would wake up at maybe 6 o'clock in the morning, and then I would do some physical activity so that I'm done for the day.
Give us a
and
picture. What sort of physical activities did you do?
Yeah. So I would, in the mornings, spend about an hour doing strength training at home with weights, do core strength, upper body, lower body, and things like that. Thereafter, you go to work, you go to office, and at office, you then have a meeting where you're updated about whatever instructions you may have passed for implementation, what has been the progress in those aspects, projects which have been undertaken, any issues which have come up, disciplinary, operational stuff. So all that is then, you take a stock of what has happened. Of course, you keep getting stock of it at home also. If it's urgent, you're on call. But I'm talking about routine, taking stock of a
typical day.
A typical day. And then you are, of course, clearing files because you are signing on things that you feel where people have put up some statement or case that they want to take up an initiative or they want to take up some project or they have different plans. So you are vetting that. There would also be maybe some operational discussions. We call them sand model discussions, where on a terrain model, you discuss how the war will be fought, some new concept, some new ideas. You also look at the training which is happening in your entire formation. Because like I told you, you're in charge of, finally, you're a fighting machine. And the most important aspect in the machine is human resource and how well they're trained. So you need to monitor that training. So that involves your traveling to those locations where people are training, checking out how well they're trained, getting them to brief you, approving their plans or altering them or suggesting changes and things like that. And that would carry on to, say, lunchtime. If you're out of station, then of course it's the whole day long. And get back, have lunch, and then you are looking at the evening where you could probably be having a sporting activity happening, or if there is a war game on, you may be back again in the sand model room, in the operational discussion room, carrying out your discussions and stuff like that. So it all depends on the situation. On the situation. If there is a situation like Kargil going on, then this is not the typical day. This is a typical day, I would say, in peacetime, when there is nothing happening across the border, and you are looking inwards at your internal health and internal health of your formation, and you are training and you're building up for that one day when you have to be put into action.
Right. So I want to know about that one day as well. But before we get there, in these peaceful times, and you mentioned you have to also make sure that how healthy or fight ready are you or war ready are you? And you have to look after trainings and stuff, and that involves working with people, right? And working with people is never easy. So what sort of challenges does one face in terms of managing people or, motivating them and keeping their morale high? And what is the attrition rate like where people quit? People quit as well, right?
Well, when I will not call it quit, because quit really means you have left.
Yeah.
So that happens to do different reasons. Maybe, he's got problems at home. Maybe he's got health issues or something like that. And normally a guy would not quit. Normally a guy would, give up. And his performance drops due to other issues which are happening around him. So dealing with humans is never easy.
Yeah.
Because there's so many complications. It is slightly easier in the army because everybody has been attuned to come onto one frequency. So when we talk of the academy, and when I spoke of it being a shock or different compared to the environment I was brought up in, the whole aim of an academy is to first break that man and then make him and mold him in a manner that you want him to be for the role that he's being prepared for.
Wow.
And so it's for everybody else. So a soldier, when he joins, he's actually forced to forget what he has learned over the years and then retaught how to respond, how to behave, how to walk, how to talk, everything. So that when you are in a machine, you can't have, when you have a machine which is working together, you can't have parts going in a different direction. You want everybody to pull in the same direction, and that is what our training is all about. So to that extent, human response becomes easier because you're dealing with people who have been trained. But nevertheless, having said that, the issues of human resource are always there.
Always there.
Yeah, and they're varied.
Yeah.
It could be to do with mental issues, like I said. It could be to do with financial issues. It could be to do with property issues at home. The wife is at home, the children out there. somebody is harassing them, then lands are being taken, or the house is being occupied, or there's a natural disaster. The entire canvas of problems which exist in the civil street are there in the army because the people are all coming from the same environment.
So what does someone like you do in that situation? How do you help them?
Yeah, so there is help at every level. Like I said, there's a hierarchy. And the junior-most hierarchy, I would say, is in a company where you have platoons. So if I'm a soldier and I have a problem, I go to my immediate senior, who may be my platoon commander, who's of the rank of a JC or junior commissioned officer, or maybe a young captain. And if he cannot resolve my problem, which in most cases he can't, because, it's external. These problems are all outside. So then it's raised to the company commander. And the company commander might even write a letter to the district magistrate of that place or the SP of that place if it is to do with law and order issue, to do with land issue. Or there could be counseling done, which is organized at unit level, where you have counselors who can psychologically counsel you to help you tide over the problem which is in your mind, because there could be many problems.
Yeah.
And it has also been seen that most of the soldiers, when they get back from leave, that's the time when they are most disturbed, because they have seen the problem, but now they have to get back, and that problem is telling on them. They have communication in terms of mobiles, so they keep getting a feedback of that problem, but they are helpless sitting out there. So there's counseling cells available. They will try and counsel you. So those kind of assistants are there. And then that level keeps going up depending upon the seriousness and the degree of the problem.
Wonderful, sir. And let's now talk about the war times. When things are not so peaceful. So please decode Operation Sindoor for us. Let's take the live example. It just happened. So what is the chain of events that happens once, like, the nation center decides to declare a war on another country? What happens?
So, you asked me two questions. What happens when the center declares war? But if you remember, recently when we had Op Sindoor, no war was declared. It was just action you saw.
Right.
Okay. So I would not really go by the premise that war will be declared all the while. Even in Kargil, there was no war declared. Okay. So the situation on ground, today, of course, everybody sees it since you have social media. We're all monitoring what's happening. This has happened, now this will happen, and you're getting a minute-by-minute update on what's happening. But if you were to go a few years back, like Kargil time, nobody knew what was actually happening till it started happening.
Right.
There was no build-up. Once it started happening, you would get some reports, and they were much less compared to what you saw now. But having said that, going back to Op Sindoor, I personally feel it was a brilliant move. For years and years, we've had this issue of terrorism being sponsored by Pakistan into our country. And each time we have sworn to do something about it. Of late, we did something in terms of Balakot, and we did something in terms of a surgical strike, but obviously it was not enough. And because it was not enough, it was repeated.
Yeah.
I don't say what we have done today is enough or not. That's not for me to judge. Time will tell how adequate it was, or if it was left short of what it should have been. But the very fact that we took action and we struck this time in the heartland of Pakistan. We didn't strike Pakistan-occupied Kashmir or the disputed areas. We struck the heartland, the Punjab heartland. And that, I think, was the message we were sending to Pakistan, that should you mess with us, then now we will strike you where it hurts. So I think it was a brilliant move. Yeah, much awaited.
Yeah. And what do you think about the ceasefire?
Well, the ceasefire is not a ceasefire, really. It's just that Op Sindoor is on hold.
Okay.
So I would not call it a ceasefire because it's not been seized. It's a
on.
pause button, which can be released by touching the play button.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And that window India has kept for itself.
And would you say we've, of course, no country admit that they're defeated or in any way, even Pakistan is making claims that they've sort of, did better and all of that. But what makes you feel that we've sort of won this conflict that was there?
I would not really say anybody won or lost. The whole purpose was to send a message which was sent effectively. That message has gone home. Rest all is conjecture. Okay. How much did we lose? How much did they lose? How many, whether we won, we lost. I don't think that was the outcome or the intended outcome of any battle.
But our defense system was tested.
Perfectly.
And it sort of came.
Yeah. I was pleasantly surprised When, when we saw those drones coming and I was also waiting to hear kahan gira, it might land here. But our defense system was so effective. It was fantastic. It surpassed my expectations of them.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's get to know the same Op Sindoor, for example, from a soldier's point of view. So people who are on the front line, उनकी लाइफ में क्या बदलाव आए होंगे जब से ये शुरू हुआ? वो कैसे क्या कमांड्स आती हैं, उनका डे टू डे फिर कैसे चेंज होता है? How do they get into action and what sort of happens?
See, उनकी लाइफ में तो बिल्कुल बदलाव आएगा. Firstly, from a peacetime situation, now you are preparing for activity and action. The moment that command comes to you, whenever it comes, firstly, your family is impacted because they know this guy is now going to go into a battle. So the family and all the relatives up the line are all now worried what the outcome is going to be. Okay. So that aspect is one. Soldier's life will, of course, change because, like I told you, peacetime routine I described to you. But when activity is going to start or action is going to start, now you're preparing for war. So preparation for war, you've already done your training. But now you will do the final, where you're tuning in your final finish points. Say if I'm from a tank regiment and I know that we're going to go to war, then we'll be carrying out a last minute zeroing of our guns, cleaning of the guns, ammunition being loaded, catering for your logistics. Your tanks are being topped up in terms of your diesel, your ammunition, your food, water, because you need to sustain yourself for 72 hours without any replenishment coming to you. All those activities will be going on. So you are training and then you move and go to a place undisclosed where you sit waiting for that order to come, from where then you will emerge and the conflict will start. So that waiting period is the most tense time.
Yeah, I was going to ask that because we're really dealing with humans, and what is the mindset of a soldier at that time?
That's where the job of the commanders come in. You'd never leave your men idle, because an idle mind can be thinking of scenarios which are detrimental to your good mental health and morale. You must keep the man occupied. And how do you keep him occupied? By training, by preparing him. And that preparation also gives him confidence. When you're trained, when you know that we are prepared, your confidence levels are high, your morale is high. So you got to build up morale. You got to, bring in that fervor of unity, nationalism, spirit de corps, and so that the man is like, you are preparing a man to be launched into battle from which he may not return. Yeah. All that activity goes on.
Yeah. Fabulous, sir. Wonderful to know this. Thank you for sharing this side. And if you remember, what's the toughest command decision you've had to make?
I really can't put my finger onto this to say this was the toughest, because every decision has implications.
Yeah.
And those implications may lead to something really, really bad or good. That only time tells.
Yeah.
So I can't really give you a point to say this was the most difficult thing. And then, that would be very textbook style, but it never happened with me in that way. Yeah, where I could qualify to say immediately. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Wonderful. What motivated you to go for an Ironman?
Well, I never wanted to do an Ironman ever because I never even heard of it. And when I go back and think about it, I think the first triathlon which came to Delhi was run by a company called Delhi Triathlon or something. There's a guy, Chiro Mitra. So he ran a small triathlon, a sprint triathlon in 2013, I think it was, where you swam 500 meters.
800 meters swimming?
No. And the one I did was 500 meters swim. Then it was a cross-country road cycling route. It was in Faridabad.
Okay.
And after which, and so I had to use a mountain bike, which I went and bought one day before that.
Okay.
And then you run 5 kilometers. So that was the first time. And I came second in it. And I was 53 that time. And there was no age categories. I mean, it was open. So I was quite surprised at my own ability. And that's where it ended.
Okay.
And then, of course, as time went past and I was in the army, I had a professional setback in my life in the army. And I was very down in the dumps because of that. So almost a year into those feeling really low about myself and my self-esteem, I decided I need to do something for myself to come out of this low self-esteem phase. And that's when I was glancing through the YouTube and I came upon this Ironman thing.
Okay.
And when I saw the distances of the Ironman, which are so intimidating, that I said, if I can do this, I was if you were to now put it into time, I would have been 58 when I saw it and I started training it. I would have been 58 when I did the Ironman, and I was 58 when I did it. So I thought that if at 58 I can do the Ironman, then I had proved to myself that there's nothing wrong with me, and I would restore my self-esteem. That's how my journey started, to do the Ironman. And I started my training, and I trained 18 long months and did my first Ironman.
What were the longest distances you had done when you made the decision of doing the Ironman? Like in terms of running, what was your longest run? Cycling, what was the longest ride you had done?
So let me start with swim. The only distance I had swum was in the swimming pool, like any casual swimmer does, a couple of lengths and you relax and you think you've done a big job. So there was zero out there.
No open water swimming experience?
No. And nor did I have any till the Ironman. The day of the Ironman was the first open.
First open water? Wow.
Yeah, open water.
Okay.
Cycling, I had done long distances. I had cycled from Leh to Chandigarh, but it was not against time. It was more leisurely, but though we pushed ourselves, but I would not, it's a different ball game when you're doing it against time because they're cut-offs. So, but I had done long distance cycling. And running, I had done a half marathon. I had a pretty decent time of 1:52. I was 56 that time.
Pretty awesome.
Yeah. So running was okay, but only a half marathon.
Yeah. So these were the distances you had done. And then did it not look intimidating, or actually it did look intimidating?
It was very intimidating.
Which is why you did it?
Yeah. That's why I did it. And I had to train. I trained 18 months. It was a lot of training I had to do because, I didn't want to take a chance that I go take part and I can't make it. It would have killed my whatever self-esteem I had left. Yeah.
And did you train under a coach, or did
No.
you all self-trained?
Yeah, I did a lot of research. I did a lot of research in hydration, nutrition, bikes, running techniques, injuries, recovery, whole lot of it. Yeah.
Lovely. Is your gut now comfortable taking gels and stuff on the move?
Of course.
Yeah.
I've done the Ironman thrice.
So 3 times, of course. Yeah. And what's been your best time, sir? I think it's pretty good. Like 12 hours something?
No, 13:40.
13:40?
Yeah.
Okay. Fabulous. And you've done 3 of these and 1 half.
1 half, yeah.
And what's the next thing that you...
1 half, I'm talking about the official one. I did one with Chira Mitra also.
Okay, yeah.
Which I don't count because it's not really an Ironman.
It's in a pool and it's a half-iron distance event, but not half-iron.
Yeah, it's not an Ironman.
Yeah. What do you want to do next? What are you training
So I
for?
spoke to my son. I have 2 sons and the elder one is in Ireland. His name is Adiraj. I said, Addy, why don't you do an Ironman with me? And I was pleasantly surprised. He said, yeah, okay. This happened in the month of January. So I told him, I said, so you do a half Ironman this year, and then next year we'll do one together. So he's training now. He's doing the half Ironman in Croatia in October. So next year, I hope to do a full with him in Vitoria, Spain. That'll be July 2026.
Okay.
Yeah.
Next year. I think it happens around July 2026.
July.
Perfect. Please talk us through the Ironman journey. What was it like when you showed up at the start line?
Let me talk to you about it in the preparation.
Leading up to the start line?
Yeah.
Yes.
And then I'll talk about the start line.
Sure.
The start line was easy. The preparation was not easy. So I had a job which kept me away 10 hours of a day. Therefore, training being difficult, but finding time for it was even more difficult. So I would go to work in the morning, leave home at about 8:30. Therefore, I used to spend 1 hour prior to that doing strength training at home.
Okay.
Get back home by about 5:36, and then I would start my endurance training. I would change, go for a run from 7 at night to 10 at night. Thrice a week I would run, twice a week same timings. I would swim, and I would keep the cycling part only for the weekend because the distance of even if you were doing a 100k cycling ride, which is woefully short of what you need to do in the Ironman, you still need 3 to 4 hours.
Absolutely.
So I would cycle on a Saturday night, leave home at about 1 o'clock. At 2, I would start cycling on the Greater Noida Expressway. Do a couple of rounds of that. Each round is 48 kilometers.
Where were you posted that time?
In Delhi.
Delhi. Okay.
Yeah, I was in Delhi. That's why I was cycling at night because there's so much of traffic by day.
Yeah, I was just wondering. Yeah.
2 a.m. in the morning I would start and finish off by about 7 a.m., 8 a.m. on Sunday morning. Because that time traffic was not so much, heat is less, pollution is less, all relative. And so that's how I managed to do my training. And it was so grueling that I swore I'll never do an Ironman again. I also cursed myself for getting into it. But I used a technique called public pledging. I went onto social media, onto Facebook, and announced, I'm going to do Ironman. Now, when I put it there, and I know that all those people who saw it obviously had their own thoughts about it, because when I'd shared it with my friends, they all discouraged me. They said, you're crazy, you'll have a heart attack, you'll be injured, why the hell do you want to do it? And so many more things.
Yeah.
And I knew now all those guys have seen it. And they would, like I said, have their own thoughts about it. And if now I quit, they would all tell me, I told you, you can't do it, you're just talking big. So this public pledging actually kept me in the system. I wanted to quit every day. The training is so damn grueling. But because I had publicly pledged, I didn't quit.
There was no going back.
There was no going back. In fact, I told my wife, even on race day, I said, I'll die doing the event, but I'm not going to quit.
Wow.
So that helped me. And so that was the build-up. And now on start line, before the start line is the registration. I went to Austria. We went about 5 days early. Registration is like first day at school. I was a greenhorn, first Ironman. There are people from 60 different countries, all looked as if they had been super fit guys, women, athletes, muscles bulging. And I was looking at myself, I said, will I manage to keep up? So that feeling of, being totally exposed comes about. Anyway, registration happened. And then a couple of issues happened with my equipment. Austria had predicted a water temperature of 23, 24. And I thought I'd be able to manage without a wetsuit. But when I went there, there was a problem with the weather. There was a disturbance. Yeah, it came to 19 degrees. And there was no way I could swim without a wetsuit. So I had to buy a wetsuit there. I had not trained in one. I had 1 day to acclimatize. Yeah. The property where I was staying had a lake, luckily. So in that I acclimatized myself. And luckily, all was good. I managed to do my swim pretty well. Then on the race day, prior to the race day, I had gone for a cycling practice on the route. And I found my cycle won't pull. I couldn't take the inclines. And then I realized, there is a rear sprocket. It has teeth. So my cassette was something called 1124. That means the biggest gear has 24 teeth. Okay. And the smallest has 11. Now, when you have 24 and you are going on the lowest gear to climb, the ratios that you're getting were not adequate for me to climb this inclines. They're very steep. I went to a shop there and got it changed from 1124 to 1128. And that helped me. 1132 would have been even better. But luckily, I could do it. And then on race day, my speedometer of the bike stopped working. It had never stopped in the entire training of 18 months. So these are things which, there's nothing you can do about it. As a result, because my speedometer was not working, I had to use my running watch for timing my cycling. So that worked okay, but it's a big issue, then you have to turn and look up like that.
And fall is a big risk.
Yeah. Apart from that, by the time I was 21 kilometers into my run, my watch ran out of battery because I had used it for those 7 hours earlier. And my last 21 kilometers was without a watch, without timing. I was only going by, my intuition and asking somebody, what's the time? So you say, okay, it's so and so, and I would calculate, okay, itna ho gaya. So these are the kind of things. So the feeling on the start line was not
great.
Anything. No, I would not say not great. It was not anything worth talking about. It was normal.
Okay.
Because in my mind, I had visualized the event thousands of times. The entire route, I'd be standing there. What would be going through my mind? How would I do the swim? How would I cycle? How would I run? So for me, it was like another practice coming up. And that visualization really helps.
It's great that you mentioned, talked about all of these challenges that you face. One trains for the swim, for the cycle, for the run, but for all the unexpected things. In endurance events, there are just so many variables that could go wrong, and they do. Absolutely. Like everything that can go wrong does go wrong. And it's all about the mindset then. Either you problem solve and fight till the end, like what can you do? Because people sometimes get 2 or 3 flat tires, like in a single race, which is incredible. And any of those can throw you off your time target. And then you can just say, maybe give up there. And just to keep pushing and, deciding that there's no way that you're quitting. and you keep problem solving, that is the way to get to the finish line.
Yeah.
So it's not just the preparation for these distances, but also the mental preparation to
And
problem
practice for things like you mentioned, tire punctures.
solve. Tire punctures, yes.
So I practice a lot on how to change. You can't repair a puncture there, but you can just change your tube.
Yes.
And going through this, I also realized that instead of carrying a pump, you have these little CO2 cartridges, which are already, you just push it into the tube and it gets inflated to a certain amount, which is adequate to reach the first point where you can find a pump. So you have to practice all that. It works a lot. It helps.
Great journey, sir. Fabulous. Talking of mindset, now you've been in the army and you've done endurance events and you continue to do them. You continue to push yourself. How does one build this mindset of making difficult choices, doing hard things? Because you have a comfortable home now, at least that you retire. You don't need to push yourself into those zones where your body is challenged and your mind is challenged to that limit where you feel like quitting, but you still continue to push yourself. How does one build that mindset of doing hard things, and why does it matter?
It's again to do with your attitude of wanting challenges or you don't want challenges. Now, if you are a person who likes to take up challenges, then it's not an issue. These challenges you can keep building up. So why do people climb mountains? Why do they go to Mount Everest? It's not for money or fame or something like that.
It's not even for fitness.
Yeah.
It's for
it's
your
an inner
soul.
calling. No,
Yeah.
You want to do something. And so they are the people who want a challenge. But if you want to know how you can develop a mind which wants challenge, then I feel there is a way to go about it. And our normal reaction of a body is procrastination. You get a problem, you say, okay, isko side mein karo, baad mein dekh lenge. But if you can bring yourself to tackle every problem as it comes to you, not procrastinate, not brush it aside, then however small a problem it is, just a problem that, okay, you have to do a printout. Now I can say, kal kar lunga main. But I say, no, printout, I'll do it now. I make it a habit not to postpone anything difficult or anything which needs my energy. Then these baby steps, as you get into a habit of tackling them immediately, this habit is what will bring you out of your comfort zone. Because finally, why you postponing things is because you don't want to get out of your comfort zone. You are, say, watching television.
Yeah.
You don't want to do it now. Main baad mein.
Inertia, जिस state में आप हो को वहीं रहना.
Correct. But if I make it a habit that the moment I get something to be done, I do it first and then carry on, then this is what is stepping out of your comfort zone. And that slowly, as you build up, will also get you to step out of your comfort zone for bigger things. A problem coming your way, you will be the first to volunteer to take it on, rather than saying, no, I can't do it. So this, I call it perceived helplessness, which we get into. That something difficult coming, I said, nahi, mere se hoga hi nahi. This is a habit. It's not that you can't do it. Till you try, you'll never know. But unless you try, how do you try? If your mind can go and say, okay, I'll do it.
Yeah.
So that can be built.
Wonderful. And you don't need to be a soldier to do that. You
No,
can build
not
that
at all.
mindset being in the life that you are in.
I think everybody who's successful has a mindset to take on things when they come to them. Whichever profession you are.
Yeah.
You can be a businessman and you postpone your major decisions, you'll go out of business soon.
Yeah. And would you say anyone can develop this mindset at any time in their life?
Yes, anytime. It's like your body. Like you develop physical endurance, you develop mental endurance. It's a development. It's not that you're born with it.
Lovely. And in fact, there is science to support this as well. So Andrew Huberman talks about, he was telling David Goggins in a podcast about this thing called, when we make the harder choice, whenever we are faced with choices, and we decide to choose the harder path, there's this part of brain that they've recently given it a name. It's called anterior mid-cingulate cortex, AMCC. And they say when you make the harder choice, that is the part that gets stronger and stronger. But it's about making the harder choice. So, for example, rising up at 4 o'clock is a harder choice for you today. Then it'll get stronger if you do that. But if you, in a few days, 4 o'clock is no longer hard enough, then it does not get so much stimulus, right? Then you need to make another harder choice. So all the time you're just seeking harder and harder things to do. And that's when this part just becomes a beast. Like you become a David Goggins sort of a person. True. Where you don't want easy things.
Yeah.
You want to make the harder choices.
And also something going along with this is the 21-day rule.
Mm-hmm.
That if you were to do any activity consecutively for 21 days, it becomes a habit. So when you talk of 4 o'clock waking up, for a guy who wakes up every day at 10 o'clock, But put him through that for 21 days, his body is going to want to wake up at 4 after that automatically. So that's another way to go about it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Wonderful, sir. What would you say to someone who's feeling very low in life? And in fact, when you were giving me the example of a commander being responsible for keeping the troops busy because idle mind can actually be detrimental and make up stories. Like this is beautiful quote in this series called Afterlife. Ricky Gervais. Yeah. The lady says, I've had so many problems in my life, but most of them have never come true. Like we just imagine all these problems in our head and they just don't come true. It's just imagination.
Absolutely.
So when we're sitting idle, we do that. So you answer maybe along the lines of taking action of some kind, but I would want to hear someone who's on the sidelines and feeling low about life, and maybe they've gotten into this habit of quitting all the time. They start something and then they quit. They start something and then they quit. And that becomes a habit. And then that can be so depressing and make you feel worthless completely, because your self-worth is usually determined by the things that you say that you're going to do and then you do them. And when you don't, that the reverse is also true, that you keep going down in a hole. How does one come out of that?
I feel you need to tackle it at two levels. One is you need motivation, and motivation could come from either within or outside. And second is you need to do proper goal setting. So goal setting is the target. In most cases, you'll find that when you set yourself a goal, there is some kind of energy generated that, okay, I want to complete this goal. And that is motivation to a point. But when it becomes too tough, you may quit.
Yeah.
So like I was telling you, I didn't want to quit doing the Ironman. So I went to and did public pledging. Whilst then, whenever I wanted to quit, I was trapped. I was trapped by my own design, because people will say, we told you. And that humiliation stopped me from quitting. So this was a technique. And so to people who are in this kind of a scenario where they want to do something, they start, but quit halfway, I think public pledging could be one such tool. The other thing is, if you also, surround yourself by people, all of who are focused, chasing some goal, determined, hardworking, then the vibes that you get from them are also going to galvanize and be a catalyst for you to chase your goal. Because you find that, say you're in a WhatsApp group and all your friends are posting, today I worked out so much, I ran so much, I swam so much, and you're sitting and sleeping, then somewhere within you that conscious starts stirring that, I'm part of this group, but I'm the only one lagging behind. And so it might help.
So surround yourself with people who want what you want.
Yeah, like-minded people, all chasing that goal or similar goals, who are hardworking. So I feel these kind of techniques, along with what I told you earlier, the 21-day rule, where a habit is formed when you repeatedly do something, those kind of things, mind over matter, taking on problems as they come and developing a strong mindset. I think a combination of all this could help a person come out of this kind of drudgery that you get into, that you start something and then you tend to give it up.
Yeah. Thank you so much for making time, General Dogra. This has been a beautiful conversation and I've been inspired and I have so much to look forward to. I will listen to this time and again. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I had a great time doing this with you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thanks.